Grey Hollow always looked a little sleepy in the early morning, but that Monday felt wrong. It was late October, and the sky hung low like a heavy grey blanket. The air smelled of sea salt mixed with damp earth and something metallic that clung to the nostrils. The waves beyond the dunes crashed louder than usual, and the usual rhythm of the town was off. No barking dogs, no mail truck engine, not even the clink of coffee cups through open windows. Fisher's Bay, a quiet neighborhood tucked near the shoreline, was nearly silent. At exactly 6:13 in the morning, Mr. Elwood, thin, tall, wearing the same brown sweater he wore every day, slid the key into the lock of his corner store. Elwood's Market since 1981, the sign above the door said in faded green paint. The shop was part store, part memory. Wooden floors creaked like they had stories to tell, and a brass bell above the door jingled each time someone walked in. Most days, it was retirees grabbing newspapers or young moms buying milk before school drop-offs. Mr. Elwood had run the place for over 4 decades, alone since his wife passed in 2007. People trusted him. They told him things they didn't tell anyone else. He had a calming presence, slow to talk, quicker to listen. Locals often said he had a sixth sense about people, and that morning, his instincts kicked in before the shutter was even halfway up. He stopped mid-motion. A small figure stood motionless on the sidewalk, right in front of the store. The boy couldn't have been more than 8 years old, but there was something about him that made him seem older. Not in his size, but in his posture, like he'd seen too much. He wore a thin grey t-shirt and dirty jeans that were torn at the knee. No shoes. His feet were scraped and raw. A ratty backpack hung off one shoulder, its fabric worn down so badly that it looked like it could fall apart any second. His face was pale under the grime, lips slightly blue from the cold, and his eyes, those hollow brown eyes, locked onto Mr. Elwood's like he was looking for something, or someone. Mr. Elwood's first thought was that maybe the boy was part of a family camping nearby. Sometimes tourists wandered too far, but this kid didn't have the lost look of someone who'd just gotten separated. He looked delivered, like he had been told to be exactly where he was. Elwood stepped out slowly. "You okay, son?" he asked, keeping his voice low. The boy didn't answer. He didn't even blink. Instead, he slowly lifted his hand and offered a piece of paper. It was a crumpled, dirty scrap, torn from the corner of a notebook. The paper was stained, the ink slightly smudged, but the words were clear enough for Elwood to make them out. Danger. Trust no one. Protect him. Don't tell. There was something else scribbled faintly at the bottom. If anything happens to me, go to Elwood's Market. Ask for help before it's too late. His throat went dry. "Where's your mom, kid?" he asked gently. That's when the boy spoke. Just one sentence. "My mom said to come here. Before he finds me." The voice was fragile, hoarse, like he hadn't spoken much lately. Maybe not at all. Elwood's heart thudded. He glanced up and down the street. No cars. No joggers. Not even the usual old man from next door walking his beagle. There was something deeply wrong here. "You hungry?" Elwood asked, trying to sound normal, trying to buy time to think. "It's warm inside." The boy didn't move, just stared at the door behind Elwood. That's when Elwood noticed the bruises, faint marks around the boy's wrists, a darker one on his neck, half hidden by the collar of his shirt, and his hands, red, blistered, dirt beneath every fingernail. Elwood didn't ask anything else. He just stepped back and pushed the door open wider. "Come in, son. It's all right." The boy hesitated, then finally stepped past him, careful not to brush against him. As he walked through the doorway, he looked back, just once, toward the street, like he expected someone to be watching from the shadows. Inside, the lights buzzed softly. Shelves filled with cereal boxes, canned beans, old coffee tins. A small table near the window where old-timers played cards on Saturdays. The boy didn't look at any of it. He walked to the far corner, sat on the floor, and clutched his backpack tightly to his chest. He looked like he might not let go of it even if the building caught fire. Elwood locked the door, then reached for the ancient landline behind the counter. His fingers hovered over the numbers for a second. Was he overreacting? No, not with bruises like that. Not with a note like that. And not with a kid who looked like he hadn't slept in days. He picked up the phone and dialed 911. Grey Hollow Dispatch. What's your emergency? Elwood's voice was calm, but his grip on the receiver was tight. This is Charles Elwood. I run the market on Dock Street. I've got a situation with a child here. You're gonna want to send someone. Fast. Outside, the wind had picked up. A single leaf skidded across the empty street. The boy still hadn't said another word, but something told Elwood that whatever he'd walked into was much bigger than anyone in Grey Hollow could have imagined. If you like interesting stories, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. And let us know in the comments where you're watching this video from. We'd love to hear from you. The call was made at 6:27 in the morning. By 6:34, the first patrol car rolled quietly down Dock Street, lights off, tires soft against the damp pavement. The second unit pulled in behind it seconds later. In a town like Grey Hollow, where the most common emergencies were fender benders and stray raccoons, 2 patrol cars showing up at once was rare. Inside the market, the boy hadn't moved from the corner. Mr. Elwood, standing behind the counter with a cup of tea growing cold in his hands, watched the flashing silhouettes approach through the frosted window. He had no plan, just a rising sense of urgency. Something told him this wasn't the kind of situation he could solve with a sandwich and a warm blanket. The door jingled when the first officer entered. Officer Lacey, mid-30s, short dark hair, sturdy build, eyes that missed nothing. She stepped in first, followed by Officer Randall, tall and lanky, with a calm voice and years of handling domestic disputes under his belt. Both scanned the store quickly, their hands resting loosely near their belts, but not reaching for anything. Yet, Elwood didn't speak. He simply nodded toward the back. When they saw the child, their expressions shifted, just barely, but enough to betray the gravity of what they were seeing. The boy sat with his back to the wall, knees pulled to his chest, hands gripped tightly around the frayed straps of his backpack. His bare feet left faint prints on the old wooden floor. He didn't flinch when they approached, but his breathing quickened. Officer Lacey knelt down slowly, far enough not to invade the boy's space. "Hi there," she said gently, her voice warm but focused. "My name's Officer Lacey. This is Officer Randall. You're safe now, okay? No one here's going to hurt you." The boy looked at her, but his eyes were glassy, unfocused, like he was listening for something else, something outside, far off. Randall noticed the bruises immediately, discoloration on the wrists, a faint shadow along the collarbone, and one that looked disturbingly recent on the left side of his neck. "What's your name, buddy?" Randall asked, staying behind Lacey. No answer. Lacey glanced back at Elwood. "He say anything?" The store owner nodded slowly. "Only that his mother told him to come here, that it wasn't safe. He handed me a note, here." He passed it to her carefully. Both officers read it silently. Randall read it twice. Lacey swallowed hard. Jesus. The boy finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. If he finds me. Both officers leaned in slightly. He's gonna kill me. The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Lacey's jaw tightened. Randall stood up and took a quiet step back toward the door, radioing dispatch with a low tone and calm urgency. He didn't use the boy's name. He didn't have one yet, but the message was clear. We have a child possibly fleeing abuse or worse. Visible injuries. Not communicative. Requesting child protective services at location. Priority 1. Back inside, Lacey tried again. Can you tell me your name, sweetheart? You don't have to say anything you don't want. But if you can tell me who you are, we can help find your mom. Is she okay? The boy's lips trembled, but he shook his head. A single tear slid down his cheek, but he didn't cry. Not in the way a child normally would. No sobbing, no outburst. Just silence. Cold, distant silence. All right, Lacey said gently. We'll do this at your pace. You're safe now. You hear me? You're safe. It wasn't clear if he believed her. A short while later, a county vehicle arrived from Brookshire's Child Protection Services. A plain silver SUV with tinted windows, nothing marked. Inside sat Julia Monroe, 39, a seasoned social worker with eyes that had seen more than they should have. She was used to hard cases. But the second she stepped into Elwood's Market and saw the boy, she paused, not because she was shocked, because she recognized the look in his eyes. She'd seen it before, in shelters, in emergency rooms, once even in the back of a church after a midnight call. It was the look of a child who knew what it meant to survive, and also what it meant to lose. Without a word, Julia knelt beside Lacey, resting gently on the heels of her boots. "Hi, I'm Julia," she said softly. "I work with kids when things get scary. That's my job. I help them get to safe places where people care. I don't have to ask you anything right now. I just wanted you to know I'm here." The boy looked at her. Really looked. It wasn't trust, at least not yet. But something flickered. Recognition, maybe. Or exhaustion. "Can I sit next to you for a little bit?" she asked. He hesitated, then gave a faint nod. Julia sat beside him, not touching, just there. The kind of quiet presence that doesn't ask anything. The kind you feel even when you're too tired to speak. Elwood brought over a folded blanket and placed it nearby. Not on him, near him. The boy didn't reach for it, but he didn't push it away either. They stayed that way for almost 20 minutes. No one rushed him. No one pressured him. Finally, when the boy stood up on his own, Julia reached out her hand, not to grab, just to offer. He didn't take it, but he followed her to the car. Before the door closed, he turned to look back at Mr. Elwood. Just one long, unblinking stare. No smile, no wave, but something passed between them. Something that would stay with Elwood long after that day. Then the door shut. The car pulled away. And the market felt very, very quiet. Outside, the wind picked up, shaking the sign above the door. Mr. Elwood didn't go back to work. He just stood there for a long time, staring at the spot on the floor where the boy had sat. He had seen a lot of things in his life. Wars, death, even his own son's addiction. But this was something else. And deep down he knew it wasn't over. Not even close. The drive from Grey Hollow to Brookshire took just under an hour, but for Julia Monroe, It felt like she was carrying the weight of the boy's silence the entire way. He sat in the back seat, eyes fixed on the horizon, his body rigid, hands still wrapped tightly around the straps of his backpack. Not once did he ask where they were going. Not once did he look afraid of the destination. Whatever haunted him had already happened, or was still happening in ways no one could see. Julia didn't speak during the drive. Experience had taught her that quiet often said more than words ever could. Kids like him didn't trust easily. Trust wasn't a word in their world. It was something long lost, buried under secrets and survival. The worst thing she could do was fill the silence with noise. They arrived at the Brookshire County Child Protection Centre at 8:11 a.m. The building was cold, bureaucratic, white walls, government-issued furniture, the faint smell of printer toner in the air. On the outside, it looked sterile. But Julia had spent almost 15 years turning corners of that building into safe zones. A closet-turned reading nook with bean bags. A drawer full of fuzzy socks and clean t-shirts. Tiny details that, to a scared child, could feel like a lifeline. She led him through the side entrance. No intake desk. No formal process. Not this time. This way, she said softly, nodding toward the hallway. The boy followed. No hesitation, just that same quiet compliance. He moved like someone used to being led, but not guided. Like he was prepared to run if he had to, but he didn't expect kindness. Not here. Not anywhere. Julia brought him into her office. Soft lighting. No fluorescent buzz. On the windowsill sat a potted plant one of her kids had named Winston. The boy glanced at it, then scanned the room the way someone scans for exits. Not for comfort. Escape. You can sit wherever you like, she said. He didn't sit. He stood by the bookshelf, eyes landing on a stuffed blue whale, half hidden between two psychology manuals. I'm gonna heat up some oatmeal. And I'll bring juice, not the kind in the little boxes. Real juice. From a jug. That okay? No answer. But he didn't leave. Julia stepped out briefly, giving him space. When she returned, he was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, the whale pressed tightly against his chest. He didn't look up when she placed the tray beside him. Oatmeal, apple slices, a plastic cup of orange juice. He just stared at it. Then slowly, silently, started to eat. One small bite at a time. She sat at her desk, turned away, typing pretend emails, giving him the illusion of privacy. Every movement he made was cautious, rehearsed, like he expected to be punished for each one. After 10 minutes, he spoke. My name's Silas. She didn't turn around. She just nodded to the screen and said, Hi, Silas. Another long pause. My mom's name was Cora. Julia heard that word like a thunderclap. Past tense. Not an accident. Not a slip. A child doesn't say that unless he knows something no child should. She told me not to talk. Not to tell anyone where we were. She said it would be safer that way. Was she with you yesterday? Julia asked, still not facing him. No. Where is she now? Silas looked at the whale in his lap. She said if something happened, I had to find the man with the green letters on the window. She said he'd know what to do. Julia slowly turned around, careful not to break whatever fragile thread had formed between them. The store. He nodded. She gave me the paper, he said. She wrote it real quick. She was shaking. She said, Don't let him find you. Don't ever let him know what you know. Julia leaned forward. Do you know who she meant? Silas's eyes narrowed. He took another bite of oatmeal, chewed slowly, then finally whispered, "Norman." The name came out with a shiver. Not just fear, hatred. A child's hatred, born from things no child should have witnessed. Julia had to fight the urge to press him. Every instinct screamed that there were things buried in his silence, keys to something dark and dangerous. But she couldn't rush him. Not yet. "Was Norman your dad?" He shook his head hard. "No. He said he was. But my mom said no. She said he lied. He always lied. She said we had to hide. Because if he found us, he'd take me again. Again." Julia's chest tightened. She made a note on her pad in shorthand, her heart racing. "Do you remember where you were before your mom brought you to Grey Hollow?" He hesitated, then whispered, "A yellow house, with a big fence, and cameras, but not for safety, for us, so we couldn't get out." Julia's fingers froze above the keyboard. "Did other kids live there?" Another gnawed. "How many?" "I don't know. I didn't see them much. Just at night. When he was gone." The room felt colder now. The sun outside hadn't broken through the clouds. The boy sat curled up on the floor with a stuffed whale, but what he was saying, what he was remembering, was shattering. Julia stood up and walked slowly to the bookshelf, pulled down a soft green throw blanket, and laid it on the floor near him. She didn't say a word. Silas reached for it, pulled it over his shoulders. His eyes didn't look like a child's anymore. They looked like someone who'd lived through war. And Julia, now sitting across from him on the floor, realized this wasn't just a case. This was something much, much bigger. Detective Harvey Ortiz didn't drink coffee. He never had. Said it made his hands shake and his thoughts too fast. What he did have, every morning at precisely 7:30, was a cup of hot water with lemon and a slice of ginger. And that morning, 2 days after the report from Julia Monroe about a boy named Silas, he never touched it. The file was thin. Too thin. Julia had sent over a preliminary report. One child, male, approximately 8 years old, injuries consistent with prolonged physical abuse, possible emotional trauma, suspected exposure to organized neglect or worse. No medical records. No school records. The name, Silas, was the only confirmed detail, and even that had no attached birth certificate or legal trace in the state of North Carolina. Ortiz had been with the Brookshire County Sheriff's Department for 18 years, 9 of those working on child protection cases. He'd seen bruises turn into evidence, children turn into ghosts, families disappear between the cracks of the system. But something about this case felt layered, staged, like someone had gone through a lot of trouble to make sure the boy didn't exist. By 9 a.m., he was already making calls. First to the Department of Child Services in Raleigh, then to state offices in Virginia, then to a contact in Dallas, Texas, who owed him a favor. He asked for something very specific, any mention of the name Silas in association with child welfare cases, open or closed, over the past 3 years. At 1:47 p.m., he got a ping. A redacted file from a rural adoption agency in East Texas. Private, expedited, closed in under 21 days. A boy listed only as Silas, no last name. Age, 7. Adoptive parents, Norman and Elise Coyle. No follow-up evaluations filed. Case marked as transferred 6 months after adoption. Ortiz leaned back in his chair. Transferred where? He pulled every contact he had. In less than an hour, he had 5 similar cases, all involving private adoptions, all finalized in record time, all from different counties in Texas, Louisiana, and Georgia. Every one of them had a common thread: children with incomplete histories, new names, and adoptive parents whose financial records suddenly spiked after the adoptions. But what made his stomach turn wasn't the adoptions. It was the insurance policies. He stared at the forms, hands now shaking despite the lack of caffeine. Each child, including the one named Silas, had a life insurance policy filed within 60 days of their adoption. The policies ranged between $100,000 and $500,000, all legally signed, all under the guise of future planning. Ortiz had a term for it: paper murder, preparing the paperwork for a death before it happened. He called Julia. She answered on the first ring. "Tell me everything he said to you," Ortiz demanded. Julia didn't need to ask who. She already knew. He mentioned a man named Norman, said he wasn't his real father, that he took him once, maybe more than once, said his mother hid him, warned him never to let Norman know what he knew. What does he know? I don't think even Silas knows that yet. Ortiz tapped his desk. There's a trail. I'm following it. But it's thin. And whoever did this, they knew how to cover their tracks. Can you protect him? Julia asked. I can try. But if what I'm seeing is right, someone's gone through a lot of trouble to make sure this boy disappears. For good. There was silence on the line for a moment. Julia's voice returned, softer now. His mom knew something was coming. That's why she sent him to Elwood. That note. It wasn't a cry for help. It was a command. She planned this. She was protecting him from something bigger. Ortiz opened a new tab on his screen and typed in Norman Coyle. Nothing. He searched Elise Coyle. Again, nothing solid. A few financial links. One mortgage in Tennessee. But no social media. No family photos. No records of employment. No traffic tickets. No noise. Like they didn't exist until the adoption. And then he tried something else. He pulled up recent death records for children under 10 in the counties tied to the other 5 adoptions. 3 dead kids in the last 18 months. Each death labeled accidental. 1 car crash. 1 fall. 1 undetermined. Each one with an insurance payout to the adoptive parents. Ortiz's chest tightened. He stood from his desk and grabbed his jacket. He'd seen patterns before. But this wasn't a pattern. This was a network. Back at the center, Julia sat beside Silas again, this time in a smaller therapy room with pale green walls and a lamp that gave off soft yellow light. No overhead fluorescence. No paperwork. Just space. Silas was drawing. He hadn't spoken much, but when Julia offered him markers and blank paper, he nodded. He hadn't stopped drawing for almost 40 minutes. When she finally looked down at what he'd made, she froze. A 2-story house surrounded by tall trees. Flames in the windows. A woman lying in the grass, one arm bent wrong. A man in the doorway, holding a belt in one hand. And near the edge of the paper, behind a bush, a child. Watching. Hiding. Julia gently took the paper and turned it so she could see his eyes. Silas, is this something that happened? He didn't answer. But the way he wrapped his arms around himself was louder than any yes. In that moment, Julia realized something else. Silas didn't just survive something. He had witnessed something. Something someone would do anything to make sure never came to light. And now, that someone might know exactly where he was. It was after 9 in the evening when Julia finally turned off the hallway lights of the Child Protection Center, leaving only her office lamp and the soft amber glow from the therapy room down the corridor. Most of the staff had gone home. The building echoed with a kind of stillness that only came when everyone else had moved on to their families, their dinners, their ordinary lives. But Julia couldn't leave. Not yet. She sat across from Silas again, this time with a soft fleece blanket wrapped around his small shoulders. He wasn't drawing anymore. The picture of the burning house sat on the desk between them, and Julia had carefully placed a fresh stack of blank pages nearby, just in case he felt like saying something with color again. But his energy had shifted. He was quieter than before. He looked drained, his small body folded into itself on the chair like he was trying to disappear. His shoes, donated from the center's emergency closet, were too big. His jeans hung off his hips. But even now, he wouldn't let go of the backpack. She noticed that. Always the backpack. "Do you want me to keep that safe for you while you sleep?" she offered, her voice gentle. Silas tightened his grip on the strap without answering. That was answer enough. "Okay," she said. "It stays with you." He leaned his head against the back of the chair, eyes blinking slowly. For the first time, he looked like he might let sleep win. She let the silence sit a little longer, then softly said, "Can I ask you something about the picture you drew?" Silas didn't move, but his hand began slowly rubbing the edge of the strap. A subtle sign. He was listening. "Is that the house you lived in before Grey Hollow?" He gave a tiny nod. "The woman in the grass. Was that your mom?" This time, he didn't respond. His eyes stayed on the ceiling. Julia leaned forward. "And the man with the belt? Was that Norman?" Silas closed his eyes. That's when Julia knew the answer was yes. But it was more than just a drawing. There was detail in it. The belt had a square metal buckle. The door had 6 panels. The house had a second window broken, with jagged black lines like someone had punched through it. And in the far corner of the picture, almost missed completely, there was something else. A license plate, drawn in blue, half cut off by the edge of the paper. Julia picked up the drawing carefully, her pulse beginning to climb. It read, TX 14K5. She stood quickly, grabbing her phone and snapping a photo of the paper. She sent it to Ortiz without a message. Just the image. He called 30 seconds later. "You see the plate?" he asked, voice low and tense. "Yes. Texas. Partial match." Silas drew it. Ortiz sounded like he was already standing up from his desk. "That might be the piece we needed. That plate could tie Norman to a specific address. If we can prove Silas was at that house, and Norman was there with him, we can move fast. But we'll need more than a sketch. We need a location. And fast." Julia paused. "There's something else," she said. "He keeps holding on to this backpack like it's everything. He won't let go of it. I haven't pushed, but what if there's something inside?" Ortiz exhaled sharply. "If there is, don't touch it unless he offers. It could be the only evidence he has, and the only piece of control he feels right now." Julia nodded. Understood. Before she could say anything else, a soft voice interrupted. "You can look, if you want." Silas was watching her. He held out the backpack slowly, his small hands trembling as he extended it. Julia approached gently, kneeling beside him, careful not to reach too fast. She accepted it like it was made of glass. She opened it slowly. Inside were the things of a boy who had left in a rush, or had never really unpacked to begin with. A toothbrush, a granola bar, a folded t-shirt, 2 crumpled receipts, a small action figure with a missing leg, and then, tucked in the back compartment, something Julia hadn't expected, a piece of paper, folded 4 times. She opened it carefully. Inside was a printed form, a child adoption packet from a private agency in Dallas. It listed Silas's name, his approximate date of birth, a guardian's name scratched out in red ink, and a highlighted line. Primary caretaker, Norman Coyle. Attached was a life insurance policy with a signature, not Silas's mother, but Norman's. Julia's breath caught. He had been collecting evidence. His mother had given him proof. Silas looked at her with tired eyes. She said, "If anything happened to her, I had to keep that safe." Julia gently set the backpack beside him. "You did, Silas," she said, her voice breaking ever so slightly. "You did exactly what she asked." He nodded once, then leaned his head against the side of the chair. "I'm really tired now." "I know," she whispered. "You can sleep here tonight. I'll stay right outside. You're not alone anymore." She turned off the light, cracked the door, and stepped into the hallway. She didn't cry. Not yet. But her hands shook. Because she knew, this boy had carried a story across state lines. A story that was about to break open a truth no one had dared to look at. Back in her office, Julia texted Ortiz again. "We have enough to open an investigation. There's more to this than adoption fraud. This is organized." Ortiz replied immediately. "Then we move now. No delays. I'm calling in backup." Julia looked down the hall toward the darkened therapy room, and for the first time since meeting him, she let herself believe it. Silas hadn't just survived. He was about to bring everything to light. Marcus Bell had walked away from the district attorney's office 5 years earlier and swore he'd never step foot in a courtroom again. Not after what happened with the Harper case. He'd watched a system designed to protect children fold under pressure, watched a 9-year-old girl be returned to her abuser because a judge didn't want to disrupt her routine. 2 months later, she was dead. Marcus never recovered from that. His law degree went into a drawer. His suits stayed in garment bags. And his anger, well, that never left. But when Julia Monroe called, using a tone she'd never used before, everything changed. She didn't ask. She told him. "Marcus," she'd said, "I need you. It's not just a bad home. It's not a custody issue. This boy, Silas, he's the first thread of something bigger. I can't protect him alone." That night, Marcus opened the drawer and pulled out the file he said he'd never touch again. By morning, he was in the Brookshire County Center. He hadn't changed much. Same sharp jawline, graying at the temples, eyes that saw through people even when they weren't speaking. But the suit he wore had dust on the shoulders. The tie didn't match. And he looked tired in a way only truth-tellers get tired. Worn out from screaming into systems that refused to listen. Julia met him in the lobby, briefcase already in hand. "I filed a temporary guardianship request," she said as they walked. "It'll be contested. The agency that handled Silas's adoption has lawyers. Expensive ones." "I'm not worried about lawyers," Marcus replied. "I'm worried about judges who don't read." She handed him a folder. "He has evidence. Real evidence. Not just words. You'll want to see the insurance policy." Marcus flipped it open, scanning quickly. "Jesus," he muttered. He carried that across state lines, Marcus. His mother trusted him more than she trusted anyone. Marcus stopped walking. And you believe she's dead? Julia hesitated. She's missing. But I believe she knew she wouldn't be around long. She didn't run out on him. She made a plan. And Norman Coyle? Still unaccounted for. But we have his name, a partial plate, adoption records with falsified signatures, and 5 similar cases in other counties. Harvey Ortiz is working the law enforcement angle. We need to make sure Silas stays protected no matter what surfaces. Marcus looked through the glass wall into the therapy room. Silas was asleep on a cot, curled up like he was still on alert, even in rest. The backpack was on the floor beside him, zipped up tight. "I'll need full medical records," Marcus said. "We're working on that." He hasn't had formal checkups. No dental. Nothing. He was hidden, Marcus muttered. On purpose. He paced once across the hallway. If there are other children still in houses like that one, and if this is part of an operation, we're not just talking about adoption fraud. We're talking federal crimes. Human trafficking. Possibly murder. Julia met his eyes. "That's why I called you." Marcus nodded once. "All right. Let's shake some trees." By late afternoon, Marcus made his first move. He called Dana Lowe. Private investigator. Ex-cop. Known for digging where others wouldn't. She'd been forced out of law enforcement for asking too many questions, ones her captain didn't like. Marcus hadn't spoken to her in 2 years, not since the Granger case. But if there was anyone who could trace a vanishing parent, a falsified adoption chain, or a hidden network, it was Dana. She answered on the second ring. "This better be good," she said flatly. Marcus didn't bother with pleasantries. "I need you. It's about a boy. Name's Silas. He survived something we're just starting to understand. Where is he?" "Safe. For now." Dana was already booting up her computer. "What's the catch?" "There's a man named Norman Coyle. Adopted him through a private agency in Texas. The paperwork stinks. There's an insurance policy, a missing mother, and there are other kids." Dana didn't reply for a moment. Then, "You think it's a ring? I think it's bigger than that. I think it's a business." Dana's voice dropped. "You have names. Only one for now. But we have a license plate. Partial. Texas registration. Starts with TX 14K5. I can work with that." Marcus exhaled. "I need something fast. Because if we don't keep moving, someone's going to try to disappear that boy again." Dana didn't answer for a long beat. Then, with a tone he hadn't heard from her since the Granger case, she said, "Give me 24 hours." Back in Brookshire, Julia prepared a cot in her office for the night. She didn't feel safe letting Silas out of sight. Not yet. Not until the system proved it wouldn't fail him like it had so many others. She sat on the floor beside him after dinner, flipping through a book, just being present. Silas finally spoke again. "Are you going to send me somewhere?" "Not unless you want to go." "What if they come for me?" "Then we'll be ready," she said. He nodded slowly. "Marcus. He looks like someone who could stop people." Julia smiled. "He is." Silas seemed to accept that. He looked down at the backpack, then at Julia again. "My mom used to say that when someone tells you to run, and you run, really run, it means you're strong." "She was right," Julia said. He blinked slowly, then leaned back into the pillow. Before falling asleep, he whispered one more thing. "She said he was coming for us. That we were running out of time. Julia stayed by his side all night. And 200 miles away, Dana Lowe was already uncovering the first piece of a map, one that would lead straight into the darkness. If you're enjoying this story, leave your like, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated with all our content. The fog was thick in the Blue Ridge Mountains that morning, too thick for spring. It clung to the trees like a warning, turning every winding road into a corridor of uncertainty. Dana Lowe tightened her grip on the wheel as her Jeep climbed the narrow path leading to the location she'd traced in just under 20 hours. The cabin was real. The partial plate Silas had drawn matched. A phone number, used to activate an old burner device tied to Norman Coyle, pinged off a cell tower in Ashe County 2 nights ago. From there, Dana followed a thread of receipts, cash withdrawals, gas station security footage, one quick stop at a bait shop. All of it led here. A dead zone in the middle of the Appalachian woods. And yet, her gut told her she wasn't just chasing shadows. She was walking straight into the lion's den. At the base of the hill, 2 patrol vehicles sat hidden behind a ridge, lights off. Marcus Bell leaned against the hood of his rented SUV, arms crossed, jaw tense. He wasn't supposed to be there. Legally, this was out of his jurisdiction. But this wasn't just legal anymore. This was personal. He had promised Julia and Silas that he would keep the boy safe. And Norman was a loose end with blood on his hands. Dana parked next to him and stepped out, wind biting at her face. Her coat was already damp from the mist. She handed Marcus a folded map and a stack of printouts. Cabins half a mile up. No power lines. No neighbors for 2 miles in either direction. Satellite shows one structure. Probably has a basement. Marcus looked at the photos Dana had printed. Grainy images of a man filling up at a gas pump, hoodie pulled over his head, but the jawline unmistakable. Norman Coyle. Alive. Alone. Think Silas might still be there? Dana's eyes were hard. If he is, we're going to get him out. Sheriff Milton, a lean man in his 50s with clear eyes and a quiet authority, gave the signal. The 2 local deputies flanked either side of the trail, weapons drawn but low. They weren't SWAT. They weren't feds. But they were parents. And they knew what was at stake. The air was heavy with silence as the group approached the cabin. Dana was first to see it. Wooden, small, a front porch with a rotted swing, one broken window covered with plastic. Smoke came from a narrow chimney, meaning someone was inside. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He'd argued murder cases, defended abused children. But nothing felt like this. This wasn't a courtroom. This was the edge of something ancient. Rescue or tragedy, life or death. Dana signaled. They moved in fast. Sheriff Milton kicked in the door. The cabin erupted in noise, shouts, creaking wood, footsteps on stairs. But it was the silence that followed that chilled them most. No one in the main room. A mattress on the floor. Rotten food in a pan. Chains near the wood stove. Dana moved first. She saw the cellar door immediately, behind a rug. Padlocked. A set of scratch marks near the base. Not animals. Fingernails. Here, she shouted, already working the bolt cutter from her bag. The lock snapped. Marcus threw open the door. The smell hit them like a wave. Mildew, sweat, blood. Faint moans echoed up from the darkness. They descended fast. Flashlights scanned the walls. A cut. A bucket. And in the far corner, Silas. He was curled up under a blanket, barefoot, shaking, eyes wild with terror. He didn't recognize them. Not right away. Dana dropped to her knees. "It's okay. Silas. It's me. Dana. Julia sent me. Marcus is here. We're getting you out." His mouth moved, but no sound came. Marcus moved to his side slowly, hands raised. "You're safe now. You did everything right. You stayed strong." Behind them, footsteps on the floor above. Someone was moving. "Go," Dana ordered. "I'll get him out." Marcus didn't hesitate. He charged back up the stairs with the sheriff and his men. Norman Coyle was there, cornered in the kitchen, breathing heavy, eyes wide. He held a wrench in one hand, blood on his shirt. "He's mine," Norman shouted. Marcus didn't wait. He stepped in, fast and sharp, grabbed Norman's wrist and slammed it into the countertop. The wrench fell. The deputies closed in. Coyle screamed, wild, rabid. "You don't know what you've done. He was promised to me." Marcus looked him dead in the eye. "He's not property. He's a child." Norman was cuffed, dragged out the front door, still screaming nonsense about agreements and ownership and things that made Marcus's skin crawl. Dana emerged from the basement with Silas in her arms. The boy was conscious but shaking. She had wrapped him in her own coat, whispering soft, steady words the whole way up. Marcus stepped forward. Silas looked up at him, eyes rimmed with red, but alive. Not empty. Not gone. "Is Julia mad at me?" he asked, voice barely there. Marcus knelt beside him. "No," he said gently. "She's proud of you. You held on. You gave us everything we needed. You're the reason we found this place." Silas blinked slowly. "I remembered the smell. That's how I knew it was the same house." Marcus swallowed the lump in his throat. "We're going home." Later that night, as Silas rested in the back seat of Dana's Jeep, head against the window, his breathing finally steady, Marcus looked over at Dana. "We stopped one." Dana kept her eyes on the road. "There's more." Marcus nodded. "But now we have the proof." And in the rearview mirror, Silas slept. Safe. For now. 3 days after Silas was rescued from the cabin, the documents found in his backpack were handed off to a federal task force based out of Charlotte. Marcus Bell personally delivered the folder, along with a sworn affidavit and a typed statement from Julia Monroe detailing everything the boy had shared since his arrival. But it wasn't just the policy forms or the falsified adoption papers. It was what Dana Lowe uncovered next that cracked the case wide open. A single, hidden detail, something no one had seen coming. Inside a shoebox tucked beneath a floorboard in the cabin basement, Dana had found a handmade doll, frayed yarn, mismatched buttons for eyes, and a key sewn inside its belly. Silas had called it Mother's Friend. He didn't know about the key, but the way he clutched the doll, even while shaking in the back seat, had told Dana to pay attention. She sliced the stitching open at a gas station just off the highway. The key was tiny, brass, stamped with a number, 8-7-9B. It took her less than 2 hours to track it. An abandoned house in the outskirts of Raleigh, formerly owned by Cora Jennings, Silas's mother. She'd paid the utilities under an alias for nearly a year. Kept it quiet, hidden, untraceable. No one had lived there, but someone had prepared it. Marcus and Dana entered the property with a federal warrant, accompanied by 2 agents from the Department of Homeland Security. The place was empty, but far from meaningless. In the back room, inside a locked cabinet, was a box. In it, a voice recorder, 3 labeled cassette tapes, dozens of photographs, a stack of documents, and 1 sealed envelope with If something happens to me, bring this to the authorities. Trust no one, not even law enforcement. Written in Cora's handwriting. Dana stared at the note for a long time. You don't write that unless you know you're already marked, she said. The tapes were devastating. In the first, Cora's voice trembled as she detailed how Norman had originally approached her through an adoption support group online. She was newly sober at the time, trying to find resources. Vulnerable. Alone. He offered help. Money, safety, a fresh start. He made her sign a temporary guardianship agreement under false pretenses. She thought she was buying time. He was setting a trap. The second tape outlined names. People who were involved. Facilitators. Case workers who looked the other way. A pediatrician who signed off on children's health even though he never saw them. A judge in Galveston who pushed through 4 separate adoptions under the same agency in less than 6 months. All connected. All paid. Each child came with a payoff. Some were kept as investments, held under threats and control. Others, those who didn't adjust or resisted, went missing. And then came the third tape. It was dated 2 weeks before Silas showed up in Grey Hollow. Cora's voice was different. Tired. Resigned. But clear. If you're hearing this, I'm either dead or close to it. Silas doesn't know everything. I didn't want him to. But I documented enough. He's the only one I trust. If you found this, you're already in danger. Do not stop. Expose them. These people are not just criminals. They're organized. And they're protected. By the following morning, the federal task force had executed 11 warrants across 3 states. 4 in Texas. 3 in North Carolina. 2 in Georgia. 2 in Louisiana. The agency that had handled Silas's adoption was shut down immediately. Its lead administrator was arrested at a country club in Houston while playing tennis. The pediatrician from the tapes was found with sealed envelopes of cash hidden in his desk drawer. He tried to claim he thought the adoptions were special needs private placements. The judge in Galveston resigned within hours of the warrant being made public. But the real bombshell came from a name no one expected. Ellen Parkhurst, a former director at Childworks International, an NGO that had publicly partnered with the adoption agency for community outreach. She was found in possession of dozens of digital files, emails, spreadsheets, proof of payouts, referral bonuses, insurance filings. Each child had a code, a projected value, risk analysis, and in some, brief notes detailing adoptive suitability, behavioral volatility, and chillingly, in red font, resale not advised. It wasn't just a scheme. It was a market. Back in Brookshire, Silas hadn't spoken much about the rescue, but something had shifted in him. He ate more. He slept through the night. And for the first time, he asked about school. Julia and Marcus kept things quiet, away from the media. They knew it wouldn't last. News of the investigation was already hitting headlines nationwide. But they agreed. Silas's name wouldn't be released. Not now. Maybe not ever. Still, it didn't stop the pressure. State officials tried to cast doubt on the documents. Lawyers tried to argue the tapes were fabricated. A handful of talking heads on cable news began spinning the story as an emotional misunderstanding. But then came Tom, another boy, found in Alabama. Same age, same patterns, same agency. And he said Cora Jennings helped him escape once, months ago, before she vanished. Suddenly, Silas's story wasn't a lone voice. It was part of a choir that no one could ignore anymore. In a press conference held behind closed doors, the federal lead investigator said quietly to Marcus, "If it weren't for that kid walking into that market in Grey Hollow, we wouldn't know any of this. That child cracked open an empire built on silence." Marcus looked over his shoulder, out the window. Silas was in the hallway with Julia, drawing again. This time, it wasn't fire. It was a home, with sunlight, and two people standing beside him. The courtroom was packed, not with media. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but with people who had been holding their breath for weeks. Prosecutors, investigators, case workers, survivors, even a few retired judges who came just to see how far the rot had gone. And at the center of it all sat Marcus Bell, hands folded on the table in front of him, waiting for the judge to speak. This wasn't just about Silas anymore. It was about the web he'd helped unravel. 11 defendants, 3 different cases being tried in tandem. Charges ranging from wire fraud and falsification of adoption documents to conspiracy to commit child trafficking and criminal negligence leading to death. And, in 2 of the indictments, murder. The weight of the trial could have crushed a lesser team. But Marcus had built a case so tight it bled. They had paperwork, audio recordings, sworn testimony, forensic tracing of insurance payouts, email chains recovered from encrypted servers, and most powerfully, 2 survivors willing to speak, Silas and Tom. Tom's testimony came first. He was quieter than Silas, more withdrawn, but he was old enough to understand what had been done to him. He described being moved between homes like furniture, being corrected when he asked about his real parents, and being told over and over that asking questions was dangerous. He remembered Cora Jennings. She gave me crackers and a note, told me to hide it under my shirt and only give it to someone with a badge. That note had led investigators to a warehouse in Mississippi, one filled with more files, more falsified documents, and photos of at least 9 other children whose whereabouts was still being determined. When Tom left the witness stand, the courtroom was silent, not out of apathy, out of shock. Then came Silas. It had taken weeks to prepare him. Julia and Marcus worked together, carefully, never pushing too far. They gave him time, allowed him to speak in his way, at his pace. He didn't take the stand in person. The judge approved a closed-room deposition, live-streamed to the courtroom but done in a small space, with Julia beside him. The first few minutes, Silas said nothing. Then, with the quiet clarity that had always been his way, he began. He said I was lucky, that I didn't have to worry about anything anymore. But I was scared every day. He paused. My mom said to run if anything happened to her. She told me never to let Norman know that I remembered what he did. She said people like him don't stop. That I had to get away. Marcus asked carefully, "Do you remember what he did?" Silas nodded. He hurt her, then locked me in the closet. I couldn't see, but I heard her scream. Then it stopped. The judge asked if Silas wanted a break. He shook his head. He thought I didn't hear anything, but I remembered the license plate. I remembered the smoke, and I remembered the smell of the cellar. That's how I knew it was the same place. That line, the smell, brought people in the courtroom to tears, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true. Undeniably, horribly true. Outside the courthouse, the media had finally learned his name. But by then, it didn't matter. Silas wasn't a victim anymore. He was a survivor, a witness. The boy who didn't just escape, but dismantled an entire operation from the inside. One child, carrying documents and memories across state lines, had revealed what law enforcement and oversight committees had missed for years. 1 week into the trial, 6 plea deals were offered. 3 were accepted. Norman Coyle, however, refused to negotiate. He claimed parental rights, claimed he was protecting Silas, claimed everything had been blown out of proportion, until the insurance policies were shown, until the signed papers were proven forged, until a financial trail tied his bank account to 3 other defendants, each one connected to a dead child. Norman broke. On the 3rd day of cross-examination, he wept. He didn't cry for the children. He cried for himself. And that's when the judge revoked his right to speak further during trial. He would be sentenced without parole on all counts. Back in Brookshire, life moved slowly, cautiously forward. Silas was officially placed under temporary guardianship with Marcus Bell. It was the first time in months that Silas unpacked his backpack. Carefully, intentionally. He folded the blanket from the center and placed it in the bottom drawer of his dresser. Julia, now officially his appointed case manager, came by every weekend. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they played board games. Other times they just sat. Silas started school again. Small steps. He didn't talk about the cabin, or the fire, or Norman. But one day, when a teacher asked them to draw their favorite memory, Silas sketched a picture of a woman sitting on a beach, holding hands with a little boy. The sun was up. There were 2 chairs. One was empty. On the back, he wrote, "I remember. I still do." The media tried to twist the story. They used terms like systemic failure, adoption gone wrong, the cracks in the process. But none of those phrases told the truth. The truth was a woman named Cora Jennings gave everything to save her son. The truth was a little boy knew more about evil than most adults ever would. And the truth was, despite all odds, they won. Not because the system worked, but because Silas never gave up. On a warm spring morning in Brookshire, the kind with sunlight pouring through the windows before breakfast and the distant sound of sprinklers clicking in suburban lawns, Silas turned 9 years old. There was no party, no balloons, no pile of presents, no loud games or streamers or clapping relatives. But there was peace, and that, for Silas, was everything. Julia arrived early that day, holding a small bakery box and a folded envelope. She wore her weekend jeans and a navy sweater, her hair pulled back, her face softer than usual. When Silas opened the door, he didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and hugged her. It was the first time he'd done that. No prompting, no awkward silence. Just a quiet, firm hug that lasted longer than most people might understand. Inside, Marcus had made pancakes. His first attempt, which he admitted tasted more like soft crackers. Silas didn't care. He ate every bite. Not because he loved pancakes, but because someone made them just for him. After breakfast, Julia handed him the envelope. He opened it slowly. Inside was a legal document. At the top, it read, "Petition for Permanent Guardianship, Marcus Bell." Silas looked up at Marcus, wide-eyed. "Does that mean I get to stay here? Like, for real?" Marcus nodded, clearing his throat. "If you want that." Silas didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to the corner of the room, picked up a sheet of paper from his art box, and started drawing. Julia and Marcus waited, quiet. After 10 minutes, Silas returned with the picture. It was simple. A small house. 2 people standing beside it. A tree with a tire swing. A dog. even though they didn't have one yet. And, in careful handwriting underneath, he'd written, "My new family." Marcus placed the paper on the fridge with a magnet, right next to Silas's math test and a doodle of a superhero. That was the moment Silas said it. Soft, cautious, but clear. "Can I call you Dad?" Marcus didn't speak. He just nodded, then got up and stepped into the hallway for a moment, because some moments are too heavy to hold in front of a child. In the months that followed, Silas settled into school. His teacher, Val, short for Valerie Graves, had decades of experience with children who carried scars they didn't know how to name. She never asked questions about where he'd been. She didn't comment when he flinched at loud noises or looked at doors a little too often. She just taught him, encouraged him, praised him when he raised his hand or helped another student. By the end of the school year, he was reading at grade level. He'd made 2 friends. He even joined a weekend art club. He still carried a bit of the old fear with him, but it didn't define him anymore. The case continued behind the scenes. Dana Lowe, never the kind to stop halfway, kept digging, finding more children, more paperwork, more silence. The federal task force expanded. Hearings were scheduled. Policies were reviewed. Politicians made statements, some honest, some performative. But one thing had changed forever. The public couldn't unsee it. Silas's story, without his name, had become national news. A feature on child protection, a breaking report on private adoption abuse, a congressional hearing titled "The Silas Case: How One Child Exposed a System." They never showed his face, never shared his voice, but they told the world what he'd done. One afternoon, while walking home from school with Marcus, Silas asked a question. "Do you think my mom would be proud of me?" Marcus stopped walking. He looked at the boy beside him, his eyes still cautious, still searching, but brighter now. "Steadier. I don't think she'd just be proud," he said. "I think she'd be in awe." Silas didn't reply. He just nodded, looked ahead, and kept walking. The night of his 9th birthday, after the house was quiet, Silas sat on his bed and opened the one thing he hadn't yet touched that day. The old, worn backpack. Inside was the stuffed blue whale from the center, and at the very bottom, tucked behind the lining, a folded piece of paper. His mother's handwriting. He had read it before, but now it felt different. "If something happens to me, trust yourself. You're smarter than you think, braver than you feel, and you are never, ever alone. Love, Mom." Silas folded the paper slowly, then placed it in a new drawer next to his bed. Not because he needed the reminder, but because he was ready to remember on his own. The next morning, he woke up, brushed his teeth, packed his backpack, and left the house with Marcus. He didn't look over his shoulder. He didn't check for shadows. He just walked forward, one step at a time, toward a life that was finally his. And if you like this story, you'll surely love the next one appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and turn on notifications. See you next time.